We have telling you about test automation and beyond, implementing continuous testing effectively, Gerie Owen. Gerie is a testing strategist and testing evangelist, helping teams get better at their test automation. So give it up for Gerie.
Good morning. How are y'all doing today? Isn't this a great conference? I'm so happy to be here. So I want to talk a little bit about continuous testing and how to implement that effectively. But before I begin, I'd just like to ask you a question. Show of hands. How many of you are part of a DevOps team? How many of you are responsible for quality? Okay. All right, so we'll talk about continuous testing, how to implement it, developing a strategy, and if we have time, monitoring production. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to be moving along pretty fast, but I will post them to SlideShare if anybody wants to read them. So, continuous testing. Well, Forrester defines it as a core capability in Agile and DevOps, where all testing activities are continuously integrated with development and delivery. Bug fixing is enabled immediately, test environments are provisioned instantly, and unit functional and non-functional tests are run in an automated way, orchestrated by continuous integration and continuous delivery tools. Whoa, that's a mouthful. So what is it really? Well, it's really an approach to managing risk. It means focusing not only on improving your test efficiency, but more importantly, increasing the effectiveness of our test processes. Assessing mitigating risk is the primary goal. So it really means focusing on quality at every stage in the continuous delivery process. So why do we want to implement this? Well, DevOps is about continuous delivery. How do we support that? Well, testing cycles have to be shortened, yet quality has to be increased. There's the increase in microservice architecture, and that requires high-quality functional testing as well as automated API and non-functional testing. Builds, integrations, and deployments are automated, and testing has to be implemented throughout the entire pipeline. And we have to test that integration. So what are the attributes? Well, continuous testing builds a safety net that helps the team protect the user experience. Andrew Clay Schaefer talked about digital transformation. Well, quality is the foundation for digital transformation. We can't, and as those of us who are responsible for quality, we are the champion of the customer, and in that way, we're the guardians of the organization's reputation. It's going to require a stable environment. It's got to integrate seamlessly with the delivery pipeline and the tool chain. And most importantly, it has to deliver actionable feedback at the time that's appropriate for each stage in the pipeline. So sometimes we hear continuous testing kind of talked about in the same framework as test automation. Well, it's more than that. You know, test automation, writing scripts, execute them, write them, execute them, and then sometimes you can have a big suite that runs on forever. Well, that's not continuous testing. Continuous testing is you're testing automatically each stage of the pipeline. So how do we implement that? Well, we engage in continuous risk analysis and processes improvement. We have to increase the velocity of our current processes. We need to implement automation throughout the pipeline, even automate the checkpoints, automate the environment builds. And finally, we have to develop a culture in which everyone is responsible for quality. So what are the practices? Well, there's defect management. Before we write up bugs, we should be talking about them. We should communicate with each other and fix them immediately rather than logging and tracking everything. We have to manage our test cases better, and we have to optimize. And that is something we'll talk about a little further on, but test optimization is the basis of automation. We need to use advanced analytics to analyze code changes. That's how we're going to be able to optimize tests. We need to determine what new tests we need, what tests can be deprecated, what other areas of the application we haven't been testing. You know, it's all about risk. We can't test everything in a DevOps environment, but what we have to test are those pieces that are most important to the customer. Remember, we're the champion of the customer. We're the protection of the organization's reputation. The more key practices. You need to have your environment available and accessible. We need to be able to spin up environments that are production-like at any time. We need to use service virtualization. We need to automate the deployment, the test environment. This embraces shift left, because then your integration testing begins even though the integrations aren't completed. Shifting left is critical to get that velocity with quality. And finally, your automating testing includes not only all of the types and layers of testing, but testing the deployment process. And that includes the automated health checks and the feedback at every step. So, how do we develop this strategy? Well, there are several components, and we're going to talk about each one of them. So, we streamline the test process. We champion that team responsibility for quality. We increase velocity and improve quality, test throughout the build, implement the automated checkpoints, shift left in not only the functional, but the non-functional too. We need to start all of that testing as soon as we code. And finally, we want to shift right. We want to implement continuous testing in both monitoring and production. So, how do we streamline the test process? There again, focus on risk. We need to completely optimize our test suites. We need to run automated tests in parallel. And we need to identify and mitigate bottlenecks. The bottlenecks are what's going to get you every time. Whether it's defects not getting addressed at the right time, whether it's not understanding the requirements properly, that's what's going to get you. So how do we focus on mitigating risk? We focus on the customer. The aspect and what aspects of the application are most important to your customers. Sometimes it's not what you think. You need to talk to the customer. You need to talk to the help desk. You need to talk to anybody who talks to the customer. You have to understand the competitive climate that your organization in. Is it critical to be first to market? Maybe so. You know? And in that case, maybe we're willing to take a little more risk. Of course, if we're developing a pacemaker or a driverless car, well, we might have to rethink being first to market. We want to map risk to application components and the requirements, and from there create the test. We want to optimize the test suite such that we provide the greatest risk coverage with the fewest test cases, and that's something we often miss. You know, I've gone into organizations. I had one organization. They had a suite that ran 3 days for regression testing. Like, well, that can't work. And we always need to report status in a way that reflects the business risk. We want to include the technical, the performance, the compliance. We want to tell our story. How's this going to impact the customer? And we have to be transparent about it. I know one organization, they have a big red light that comes up when there's a gate in the pipeline that needs to be addressed. We have to keep that free transparency and get everybody responsible for quality. So complete test optimization really has 3 parts. We have to optimize the test scope, the test cases, and the test suites. So in the scope, we want to focus on the customer. What test cases what's the highest risk features? What's the highest risk code? What's the most used pathways through the application? Those are the ones that we have to focus on. We need to understand all the integration testing and get every time. We want to implement service virtualization for those integration tests so that we can shift left and run them as soon as we start to we can look at bottom-up and top-down integration. I think both of those are really important in DevOps because although it does take time to create the stubs and the drivers, that gets you that shift left. We want to use as realistic data as we can, maybe even synthetic data generation, but and of course, if we do use real production, we have to be totally certain of our not violating any data privacy issues. And we do need to include some exploratory testing. Maybe it's toil, but you can't automate exploratory testing. You need to find some of those user experience bugs. You may need to test out a few flaky automated tests, find out what your problem is. Some of that can be handled in exploratory testing. So how do we optimize the test cases? Well, for the first thing, tests need to be focused on the functionality they're validating. They should be simple. The more complex the test, the more complex the test script, the more validation you're going to have to do against the test script. And you need to make them independent. Because there again, you're going to be spending more time fixing them than you have, and that can create a bottleneck. We have to optimize the suites. Regression test selection is an ongoing process, and that's what I think a lot of teams forget. Oh, we got everything automated. Well, great. But you're constantly changing the code base. You're constantly releasing new features. That means you're constantly changing your tests. So you want to have a tracking mechanism. You periodically clean up, and periodically may mean like every day if you have to. And you can use metrics to determine what tests are really, the ones that are really working for you, the ones that are most important. So then when you put together your test suites, again, you're selecting the ones that are most high risk. You have to include all of the customer-centric ones because those are the business risk. You need to look at your functional automation tools, and again, you don't get married to any particular tool because you may have to use something else. Hopefully, you can use some cross-platform testing. I hope your scripts will run on any device. You need to be able to use the same scripts for cross-browser, and you might even be able to collect some performance metrics. Same scripts, less toil, right? And run your automated tests in parallel. Just, a few best practices that I'm sure you're aware of, but, atomic tests, one test per script. Autonomous tests, they shouldn't rely on a test before or after, because then if you have one fail, your whole suite fails. You want the execution for each test to be a minute or less in a local environment. And then each test should create and delete its own data. Now, identifying, mitigate bottlenecks. Why? They impede velocity. And remember, that's, again, an ongoing process. You might have everything running smoothly, and the next day you don't. So the constraints to the test process can be found anywhere from requirements to post-production checkout. Maybe testers aren't included in backlog refinement. Maybe they haven't been included in story pointing. If defects aren't getting addressed on a timely basis, you can have the issues of your regression suite. And finally, a lot of companies are still doing post-production checkout manually, which you don't want to do if you can help it. But all of those constraints and any other constraints you can think of, they all impede velocity. Again, champion team responsibility for quality. The testers manage the quality process, but each team member in the DevOps team is responsible for quality. So we all need to understand our role in quality, and we need to take that as being important. So we want to increase both velocity and quality. We do that through the test pyramid. We want to have as few manual tests as possible, automating everything. We want to shift left. The automation should get to the base of the test pyramid. We want to implement test-driven development, BDD, pair developers and testers if we can. But we do have to include some risk-based and exploratory. We want to implement continuous functional and non-functional, performance, security, availability, accessibility. We have to continually think about those things throughout the process. And then finally, amplify those feedback loops. Put up a big red flag that enables decision-making. And it enables the risk-based, with the right metrics, it enables the risk-based decision-making. How do we improve quality? Well, developers, operations, product owners, everybody has to embrace testing. What's in it for you? What's in it for you is what's in it for your customer. The entire team is responsible for quality. Want to implement post-production monitoring. That's another critical, because as much as you try, you're always going to find those little things in production. And when you get there, you want to find the bug that escaped into production before your customer does. So that's why we should implement post-production testing, of course, depending on the risk, but we need to do it. Integrate testing throughout the pipeline. The automated test should test at each stage in the pipeline, and actually it should also test the pipeline itself. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to wind up with bottlenecks. We want to implement automated checkpoints. Your unit test should verify the code. The component test verifies the key features. Integration verifies the workflows. May involve multiple applications, but you have to do it. The risk-based optimized regression test runs prior to each deployment. And if you have that risk-based, that regression suite risk-based and automated, you can run it before every deployment. And if it's taken too long, you need to optimize further. And maybe you need to change that regression suite depending on what you are delivering in that release. The post-production health checks need to verify the applications are up and running. And the post-production monitoring finds the defects and the performance issues before they impact the customer. Shift left. Functional, ATDD, TDD, BDD, automate early and often throughout embrace the test automation pyramid. Automate, 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 reduce toil, but don't forget your exploratory testing. Non-functional, again, begin it as soon as possible, because if you have performance and security, especially security, those flaws happen in the design. Design's hard to correct. Got to do that early. Finally, you've got the continuous monitoring in both test and production. Continuous monitoring, that comes from the principle of amplifying the feedback loops in both test and production. It enables collection of analysis and data metrics throughout the life cycle, and that's got to be used. Collecting metrics is one thing. Collect metrics, but don't collect them unless you're gonna use them, and use what you collect. That's how you learn what your customer experience is all about. That's how you get to know your customer. That's how you represent your customer. The most important data is about how the users interact with the application, their feedback. And that lets your stakeholders make and target adjustments. Maybe the functional testing, maybe you need a functional, there's a particular pain point to your customer. That's got to be prioritized. upgrades to environments. Maybe there's a performance. You know, if you have a performance issue, your customers are impatient. They're going to go somewhere else. So, you know, those things have to be addressed really, really quickly, really intelligently, and tested well. Testing in production includes monitoring data, transactions, simulating transactions. You can even do some beta testing, canary releases, A/B testing. Get the customers involved. For the most part, they'll be happy to do that. So, in summary, continuous testing is an approach to managing risk by focusing not only on eliminating testing bottlenecks, but more importantly, increasing the effectiveness of our test processes. Automation tests is a subset of continuous testing and is a key practice. It is not continuous testing. Our continuous test strategy starts with streamlining the test process, champion team responsibility for quality, increase velocity and quality, test throughout the build and delivery pipeline, implement automated checkpoints, shift left, shift left, shift left, and then continuously monitoring in test and production. So I have a few references here. I'll take questions after or during the break. I'd love to have conversations. I love testing. But as I conclude, I will ask you again, of all of you who raised your hand on being on a DevOps team, let's do that again. If you're on a DevOps team, raise your hand. Okay. And now I will ask you, if you're on a DevOps team, are you responsible for quality? Let's see all those hands again. You are all the champions of the customers and the guardian of your organization's reputation. Thank you very much.